my presentation is about, but I've said this before and I'll say it again. There are those who are here for themselves and those who are here for everybody else. So as I explored that idea, what I mean by that is, as an artist, I've been working very hard to figure out a way in which I can be here for everyone else. I want to be the latter. I really want to create things and make sure that the world understands one another. And so, researching a little bit, Judy Chicago is another artist in my field, a feminist artist, who talks about the art of expressing oneself is a part of a larger unity. You can't possibly talk as an artist about yourself without having to speak for people who have no voice. The whole point is to give people a voice. And so a lot of my work involves creating a space for invisible narratives, the people and the stories that we don't really think about. News is a huge thing. Photojournalism is another giant thing. But what about the people who are invisible? What about the people in our society who are on the margins, who aren't really being talked about, who aren't being given a voice? So I decided this summer that I was going to go to Chicago. It was very random. I just decided I wanted to be off the East Coast. And while I was there, I realized that through the grants that I was given, I was wanting to figure out a way to explore some type of people that fell under this idea of this invisible narrative. And as I'm a visual studies major, I'm dealing right now with a lot of themes of visibility, invisibility, hypervisibility. And what does that mean to be hypervisible or invisible, for that matter? I'm not sure any of us really knows, because we go here, we go to Penn, we are a place that people know, people respect. But what about those people who don't have that? And so, being a black woman, I've had a lot of encounters with the black male, and I really wanted to understand them because, quite frankly, I believe them to be one of the most isolated, one of the most marginalized types of people in our society. And so I wanted to ask them, what, in your minds, what is the first thing you might think of when you think of a black male? Like, ideas that come off the top of your head. I would say incarcerated, dead, victims of police brutality, inept, violent, predators, rappers, gangsters, basketball players, athletics, people, I don't know. Like, that's a lot of the stereotypes that we place on our black men, but what about, who are they actually? Because as a completely misunderstood and very much marginalized part of our society, I really wanted to understand what wakes a black man up in the morning, gets them to continue to contribute to a society that gives very little back to them. Like, why should they? So I was in Chicago, and instead of, if somebody asks you what motivates you, people might be like, the money, fame, fortune, whatever. But I don't think it's a very easy question to answer. Anyone can, sort of say something, but they're not really getting at it. And very few people are able to analyze themselves so quickly. So what I asked was, what is your biggest fear? Because it was my understanding that if I can understand more so what people are afraid of, what are you running away from, that gives a better idea of what are you running towards. And so over the summer I interviewed over 50 black men throughout the streets of Chicago, from the north through the south side, and I asked them this question. What's your biggest fear? What's the worst situation you could have to live through? What's the worst thing you could find yourself, what's the worst situation you could find yourself in? And so this is Herb and Thelonious. I've met them on my first day out. Herb was very much, they were both actually afraid of failure, very different types though. Herb was more so worried about the fact that he would be leaving his family with nothing. He didn't want to fail and not be able to give anything back to the people who raised him. Thelonious is an artist, and he's like, I'm afraid of making weak shit, to be honest. Like, I can completely relate with him. Like, you don't ever want to be feeling like the stuff that you're making has no matter, does not, move anybody, it's just sort of, weak. This is Brendan. Brendan is actually living in Guam right now through his military stuff that he does, but he was telling me about how he's worried about never realizing his potential. Waking up, or even like passing away and realizing that he left nothing behind, no type of legacy, not really understanding, or not having the world understand that he gave something back. This is Chris. Chris was one of the people who sat and talked to me for the longest. He actually really went on about how he's incredibly afraid of the fact that the black community within itself is ripping itself apart. That black on black violence, black on black, hatred is really ripping the whole like makeup and psyche of the black community. And for him, it's crazy that he was sitting on a bus one day and he was trying to make room for this, this young woman who looked at him with disdain, who looked at him with suspicion because he was a black man, and she was a black woman. He was shocked. He was like, how could this still be a thing? Why is it that we cannot get out of this whole idea of gangbanging and killing one another? And why can't we just be grateful and gracious to one another? Why is it that we are just as hateful on one another as these other demographics and other races are against us? this was Damon, and he was another one of the people who touched me amazingly because of his own story. It was kind of crazy. I asked him, you know, what's your biggest fear? And he goes, you mean something that could happen or something that's already happened? I go, well, you tell me. What has happened to you? Have your worst fears been realized? Tell me about it. And he tells me this story. Well, one day I was walking down the street, and the police car pulled up right next to me, actually. And you know, they kind of beat me up and threw me in the back of the police car. And then they put me into the precinct. And then they threw some drugs on me. And now I have 2 years of probation. So that's an example of a black man having done absolutely nothing wrong. Some police officers just wanted to, you know, mess him up that day. Or for the rest of his life. This is Eli. He was selling water by the side of the road in Chicago. It gets pretty hot in the summer, same as everywhere else pretty much. And you know, this is how he makes a living. But for Eli, he was so sweet, and he just told me simply enough that he was very afraid that he would never find anyone who would love him.
Well, it's already getting destroyed by all these gangbangers and all that, but at the same time, it's getting destroyed more than just gangbangers. It's the access to the guns that they have.
Yeah,
from
definitely.
The government. Mm-hmm. It's really their fault. That's what really keep me up at night.
How old are you?
14.
What keeps him up at night is gun violence, and he's 14 years old. On top of that, what keeps him up is the fact that young people, he thinks, aren't taking advantage of the resources that the community is trying to provide. He's a part of a program called Kids Off the Block. This woman basically goes and she, you know, talks to these boys and creates a space for them to live, or creates a space for them to have activities happen after school, after classes, or whatever it is, under the ages of 18, so that they're not on the streets gangbanging. So, as much as I did love the work that I did in Chicago, and I will be pursuing it throughout my senior thesis, and I think it was very important work, one of the things that I learned, I was also in Ghana this summer, and it was hilarious to me because my friend was just joking, but he's Ivorian, and he says, you know, it's funny, Americans really think that they're the only people on this planet. And I think that's so silly, and after this last election, I will be very clear, I was not happy with the results. But I think it's very interesting to see that we, as a giant community, as a country, voted for this specific president without really understanding what the implications are maybe of that in the larger grand scheme of things. Other people around the world, other countries around the world are constantly having been made aware of other countries that are next to them. Almost everybody has an understanding of what the geography is outside of their own country. The climate, the social climate, the political climate, those things are very clear to a lot of places around the world, but the Americans, a lot of Americans have no idea. And they really think that things start and end from New York to LA. That's basically it. It's real. It's a real thing. East Coasters, I'm one of them. I have no idea of the geography going on in the inside of the United States, but I can say that a lot of times my perception happens within the United States, and I would love to keep expanding that out. So as I work on stories like this, more invisible narratives, I want to branch out past Chicago, past the United States. Where does that take me? Well, I got lucky enough, privileged enough to be accepted into a class that will be taking me to Cuba this upcoming spring break for 2 weeks. And I plan on examining the invisible narratives of the people who exist within a dual currency society, and I'm hoping to even find out more now that things have changed in the political climate, for better or for worse. In addition, if possible, I'd like to get back to Ghana, where I was documenting the house staff. Many of you might not understand this or might not know about it, but in a lot of places in West Africa, there is the middle class, or like what most people live in, I guess. And there is the rural class, and the rural class is very separate, and a lot of times they come from their places in the rural areas to come live in the homes and work in the homes of people who hire them as cooks, gardeners, drivers, and they live underneath these people. And so I want to know, what is it like to dedicate 24/7 of your life, all of that, to somebody else? Your life is about somebody else's. What does that mean? And why is it that you do what you do? So as I end out my TED Talk, and I'm very happy that you all listen, I want to ask the audience, just as a hypothetical, which are you? Somebody who's going to be here for yourself, or somebody who's here for everybody else?